important because we're doing institutional approval, so we need our folks on online. So we're going to move to item 3F, institutional approval, stage 3, consideration of provisional approval for Santa Maria Bonita School District. This item is being presented by Michelle Williams-George. This is an action item. We have 2 others to do. Ms. Williams-George, will you please begin?
Okay. I was going to say good morning, but okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon, commissioners. So the next 3 items before you present 3 institutions in the initial institutional approval process, all of which are proposing a teacher induction program. The 2 institutions are in stage 2, and 1 institution is in stage 3 of the IIA process. And in the interest of time and succinctness with your impacted schedule, we wanted to combine the introduction for all of these 3 items. So depending on the item, you'll find the IIA chart with the current stage of the institution highlighted on page 2 or 3. The stage 2 items show how the institutions have established an institutional infrastructure, financial resources, and theoretical foundations on which they will build their educator preparation programs. Approval of stage 2 does not permit the institution to offer the proposed program, as more specific information and documentation will be submitted in subsequent stages. The stage 3 item focuses on the institution's capacity to comply with policy, statutes, and regulations, as well as providing more detail on the institutional infrastructure which supports the proposed program. Approval of stage 3 would mean the institution is provisionally approved but cannot offer the proposed educator program until the completion of stage 4, wherein relevant program standards are determined to be aligned and brought before the Committee on Accreditation. If the Commission chooses to deny eligibility in any of these stages, it may identify what it sees as incomplete in the current submission. The institution may then address those items and come forward again for approval. You will find each institution's full submission provided as a link on page 1 or 2, depending on the item. I will present the first 2 IIA items, and my colleague, Hart Boyd, will present the third. So do we have everyone from Santa Maria Bonita here? Do you want?
I have her, but if she's not coming, ask her to turn off her mic.
Ask her to turn off her mic? Oh,
turn on her microphone.
Shelley, apparently you are on, but could you turn your mic on?
Are you there? Do we need to move to a different institutional approval?
Mm-hmm.
Our apologies to everyone until we have the tech working on the other side.
Are Aaron Watson and Donna Scarlett here? They're with Gateway?
Yes.
Okay. Michelle, where would you like to go?
Well, why don't we go ahead with Gateway?
Okay.
And we can see if Santa Maria Bonita is here.
Okay, so we're going to 3G.
Yes.
So, 3G. So everyone, item 3G is the initial institutional approval stage 2 eligibility requirements for Gateway High School. Okay. The item is being presented by Michelle Williams-George. It's an action item. Ms. George, will you please begin?
Thank you. So the second item, or what will be now the first item, of the 3 IIA items, as you said, 3G, presents for the Commission's consideration and possible approval Gateway High School's responses to the Stage 2 eligibility requirements. Gateway High School is seeking initial institutional approval for eligibility to offer a teacher induction program. On pages 4 through 6 of item 3G, you'll find staff recommendations of aligned for criteria 1 through 9. On pages 7 through 9, you'll find Gateway High School's responses to criteria 10, 11, and 12 for the Commission's consideration. Considering the information provided in this agenda item, staff recommends that the Commission grant eligibility to Gateway High School, which would allow the institution to move forward to Stage 3. The Commission may identify topics it may want to see addressed in Stage 3. Staff is available to answer questions, and I'd like to introduce Aaron Watson and Donna Scarlett from Gateway High School who are here to answer any other questions.
Commissioners, do we have any questions? Well, actually, my apologies. We'll open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card if you're here, clicking on the raise icon hand if you are on Zoom, and *9 if you are participating by phone. Recording secretary, do you have any public comments?
There are no public comments on this item.
Okay, thank you. Public comment period for this item is closed. Now, commissioners, I was a little preemptive. Do commissioners have any questions or comments? And Commissioner Klatt does.
Thank you. And good afternoon. I have a question, and perhaps you can answer it now, or it might be something that you could include more information for next time. But I was interested in how your mentor teachers will be meeting with the induction teachers. I know it's for at least an hour per week, but where would that time come from? Would the mentor teacher have a common prep period with this teacher? How would that be embedded into the workday to allow them the time to have those meetings?
I can speak to that. So with our current school, Gateway High School and Gateway Middle School, and we would negotiate this with partner schools, we typically have mentors who do have release time and then therefore can meet with folks during a common prep so that it's built into folks' schedules. Alternatively, sometimes folks opt to not meet at that time, but it is built into their schedule that they would have the release time to be able to do that. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but just to clarify, so they would on a weekly basis get release time from the class that they would be teaching to do that?
Yeah, so like currently, like when we have mentors working with teachers in induction, they have release time every week to meet with folks. So anybody who's a mentor within Gateway High School has a release period to coach other teachers and mentor other teachers, and so that's built into their job.
Thank you for clarifying that. That does answer my question.
Great, thank you. I have kind of a broader question that was perhaps a stage one, and I'm just a little behind. But can you tell me a little bit more about the impetus for you guys to have your own induction program?
Definitely. So Gateway High School has been around for about 22 years, and we've worked with several different induction programs over the years. And we have been talking for a number of years about wanting to create something that was more aligned to what we saw our teachers needing. So a key part of our mission is supporting students with learning differences. And so we've spent a lot of time, that's one area, looking at, well, how do we support new teachers around universal design for learning and differentiation and things like that. So that was one impetus. We also have found that for us in the Bay Area, being charter schools in San Francisco, but also other Bay Area charter schools that we collaborate a lot with, there have not been very many local options for us to pursue outside of if we're not included in a district program in our kind of district that we're chartered in. And so we see a need there within our own schools, but also within other schools, other small charter schools in the Bay Area. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you for indulging me. Commissioners, any other questions for stage 2 eligibility? Okay, not seeing any. It's an action item, so do I have a motion to either grant eligibility to Gateway High School to move forward to stage 3? It's 2 though, right? It says, yep. Oh, to move forward to stage 3 or deny eligibility.
Yes.
Commissioner Klatt.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second? Okay, Commissioner Simmons. I have a motion by Commissioner Klatt and I have a second by Commissioner Simmons. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Great, the motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Williams-George. Now, Ms. Williams-George, are we going to 3H or are we going to go back?
We're actually going to go to 3F.
Going to go back to 3F. Okay. Thank you. And so we're going back to the Santa Maria Bonita School District. She already provided us with all the context. And so we now have our speakers
Yes.
on the call, right?
Yep, there they are. There she is.
Okay. So I think I could move forward to just asking if there's any public comment since the stage was set for this one.
So Santa Maria Bonita is stage 3.
Okay.
So the school that Hart will be presenting is in stage 2. So we're doing a stage 2, stage 3,
Okay.
2.
All right. So
Okay.
presentation will begin.
Yes. As I just said, this item presents Santa Maria Bonita School District's responses to stage 3 of the initial institutional approval process for the Commission's consideration and possible provisional institutional approval. As stated in the agenda item, Santa Maria Bonita School District is also proposing a teacher induction program. Before addressing the agenda item, I'd like to review the context of this particular institution. Santa Maria Bonita School District completed stages 1 and 2 of the IIA process and was approved as an eligible institution by the Commission at the April 2022 meeting. As identified in the institution's response to criterion 11 of the eligibility requirements, Santa Maria Bonita School District has been offering their new teachers support since 2020 to supplement and, in the case of mid-year hires, fully support integration into the teaching profession. This work is done through the Teacher Development Program, which is housed in the district's Department of Teaching and Learning. Santa Maria Bonita School District describes the proposed induction program as being built on the core values of equity, commitment to diversity, responsiveness, reflective dialogue, and positive presupposition. Just Shelley is here. So we thought we would have two. We only have one district representative here to answer programmatic questions, Shelley Hart. The link to Santa Maria Bonita School District's webpage can be found on page 3. Summaries of the institution's responses to the initial program preconditions as well as the teacher induction preconditions can be found on pages 4 through 7. Commission staff reviewed these preconditions and found them all to be met. Summaries of the institution's responses to the common standards can be found on pages 8 through 14. A team of BIR members reviewed, collaborated, and came to consensus that all common standards are aligned. Based on the findings of met for all relevant preconditions and aligned for all common standards, staff recommends provisional institutional approval for Santa Maria Bonita School District for a period of 3 years. This time frame will allow the institution to navigate the remaining stages of the IIA process, and this includes responding to program standards in stage 4, collecting program data, and hosting a provisional site visit for stage 5. And after that provisional site visit, staff will bring a complete report before the Commission for consideration of full approval, thereby completing the IIA process. Staff is here to answer any process questions, and Ms. Hart is here to answer any questions regarding the submission of the proposed program. And thank you for your attention to this item.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Now we'll open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting your request card if you're here, clicking on the raise hand icon if you're participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if you are participating by phone. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
We have no public comments on this item.
Okay. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? Oh, thank you, Commissioner Klatt.
My standard question that I ask everyone, you actually answered when you came here in April, and I was able to go back in the minutes and see your response to that. So I will cut to the chase and move that we grant approval for you to move to stage 4.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Davis. Okay. All those who are in favor, say aye. All those who oppose? Okay, the motion carries. And thank you, Ms. Williams-George. And most of all, thank you, Santa Maria Bonita. Okay. And we're now going to move to 3H. Changing of the guards. Okay. So our last EPC item for today is item 3H, Initial Institutional Approval, Stage 2, Eligibility Requirements for the Charter School of San Diego. This item is being presented by Hart Boyd. This is an action item. Mr. Boyd, will you please begin?
Yes, thank you. Like item 3G, this item brings forward an institution currently in Stage 2 of the Initial Institutional Approval process. The Charter School of San Diego is seeking to offer a teacher induction program and has submitted responses to the 12 eligibility criteria. Criteria 1 through 9 have been reviewed by staff and determined to be aligned, while responses to criteria 10 through 12 have been left to the Commission's determination. Considering the information provided in this item, staff recommends that the Commission grant eligibility to the Charter School of San Diego, which would allow the institution to move forward to Stage 3. Joining us today to answer your questions pertaining to the Charter School of San Diego's submission are Catherine Rambo, Curriculum and Professional Development Coordinator, and Veronica Radke, Administrator of Human Resources. Thank you for joining us today, and staff is available to answer any process questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to open for public comment. So again, if there's members of the public that are here and would like to give a presentation, notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card. For those on Zoom, click the raise hand icon. Those on phone, *9. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments on this item.
Okay. The public comment period is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments? Okay, Commissioner Klatt, carry us on through. Oh, Commissioner Gross?
Please.
I just had a clarifying question because I saw two different under the location for your Research Training Development Center. Under Criterion 8, it says in Bonita, California. And then under Criterion, I think 11 or 12, it mentions that training center is in Chula Vista. So for folks outside of San Diego who don't know, those are really far away from each other, Bonita and Chula Vista. So and it looks like all of your schools are in South County. So I'm curious as to where that location is.
Absolutely. I apologize for that. It's on Bonita Road, but technically the zip code is in Chula Vista. So we're right on the outskirts of Bonita, but it is a Chula Vista address.
Excellent. That makes much more sense. Thank you.
Great clarifying question. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, I think Commissioner Klatt.
Thank you. So if you could just clarify, and I think I saw it here, but if you could clarify, so the mentors who will be assigned to the candidates, are they teachers on special assignment? Where are they teachers currently in their classroom? So if you could speak a little bit more about when the meeting time would occur each week for induction.
Absolutely. So the teachers who will be the mentors, they are teachers and they are teacher leaders within the school. So their specific department assignment would be specifically to be mentors for the mentees. And we are a hybrid school, and so we don't have 7 different periods a day. So our scheduling is very flexible. So they would be meeting, again, one hour a week with their mentors at a time that's convenient for both of them that are outside of their student hours, but within their school workday.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Yeah, Commissioner De La Torre.
Just for clarification, so the mentor teachers are teaching full day, and then after school they meet with their mentees. Is that correct?
It would not be after school. So we are a non-classroom based school, and our students are on a university model. So they're coming in twice a week for in-person, and then they're meeting on the additional days virtually or via phone with our teachers. So each teacher has a roster of students, and they have specific student hours that may be from let's say 7 in the morning until noon. And then after that, they have some administrative hours. So it would be within those administrative hours when they're not currently seeing students that they would be working with their mentors.
And that is during the same instructional time that they're being paid for as a teacher?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Any further questions? I know. Commissioner Klatt?
I would move to grant eligibility to move on to the next stage to the Charter School of San Diego.
Okay. So we have a motion to grant eligibility to Charter School of San Diego to move forward to stage 3. Do I have a second? Commissioner De La Torre. Further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Okay. I believe we're going to recess for lunch, but I will just check with Chair Sloan first. Of course.
These institutional approvals made me think about this. I just want to clarify with staff something related to need and access. When an institutional, come on back.
Come on back. Luckily, Mr. Boyd hadn't gone upstairs yet. Yeah.
I didn't want to bring this up while we were going through individual approvals. Just in terms of process, when LEA applies to offer a program, I know that they have to write to the local need, and I'm wondering how we consider, or if we should consider, the availability of other programs, like the concentration of programs in particular areas, when we're deciding whether or not to approve another program in that particular area. Is there a mechanism for that?
So we certainly do take that into consideration. I would like, because you specifically called out LEAs, would just like to point out that in general, what we're seeing with LEAs right now is that those that were part of, for instance, like a consortium of districts and schools that were offering induction, they're tending to break off now and bring those induction programs home, so that they can offer an induction program that they think can be very clear to the specific context of their region, their student populations, et cetera. So with LEAs, mostly we're seeing that, and we haven't heard yet that perhaps we don't want as many induction programs. So would certainly value commissioner input if that's a concern.
I'm always a little bit, I don't want to say concerned, but curious about kind of the proliferation of services in a particular area and how that impacts our candidates, how it impacts program. And I think what provoked it for me is this, when we asked them to talk about, like, if it was to close, what would happen to those candidates? And there's always a place for the candidates to go. So I think to myself, well, if there's a place for the candidates to go, why are we creating a new program? So thank you for that clarification.
And if I can, for that, there has to be a place for candidates to go. Them not having an answer for that is not an option. So even if it was someplace, let's say far away or a little bit distant, they have to demonstrate for us that they have some kind of a thought around making arrangements so that candidates never end up sort of, high and dry if their program isn't approved or if it fails in some way and the COA, shuts it down. So they have to have an answer for that.
And I can provide an example. Santa Maria Bonita, who you just approved, the induction program that they have been using was an hour plus drive for a number of their who they hope to have as candidates. So for them, they felt like that was not as accessible if they could have one in-house, as well as continuing to add the support that they thought was more specific to their region.
I think definitely accessibility, we should be thinking about that very carefully. I was more thinking about us being mindful if there becomes a concentration of of programs. Like, how do we deal with that? So thanks, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming back.
Thank you, Commissioner Renshaw. I mean, the question always helps all of us, so thank you. Sure,
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that question, Commissioner Francois. I think we have to keep looking at this because I hadn't really thought about the fact that I think it works when schools want to have induct their candidates in their schools, but then if a candidate leaves after a year, then they need to go somewhere else. So I'm happy to hear that we've got some assurances built in. That's good. Commissioner Simmons.
An interesting aspect of that, though, is that there tends not to be candidate choice in the induction world, whereas in every other type of credential there is.
Good. Yeah, something for us to keep an eye on. For the moment, we are going to get lunch, and when we come back from what we are going to do is. Ideally, we have 20 minutes to go grab something, come back. It's a working lunch. We eat here at the table. If you're not back in 20 minutes, we will wait for you, but try. When we come back from lunch, we will go back to item 3E, which was the CalTPA item, and then we will move to item 3B. Okay? And then closed session. So we suspect that item 3B will come up around 1:45, 2 o'clock for those who are waiting for it. Okay?
So we're recessed for a little bit.
All right, commissioners. I think we're ready. I know we're all eating still, but I think we are ready to begin. We there? Okay, item 3E. Is my mic working? Bring it a little closer. Okay, is my mic working now? All right, item 3E is update on the development of the CalTPA for education specialist, mild to moderate support needs, and extensive support needs credential areas of emphasis and adoption of passing score standards for these performance assessments. You'll notice I am not Commissioner Martinez. I'm filling in. I will do my best to fill her shoes. This item is being presented by Amy Rising, James Webb, Heather Klesch, and John Twing from Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. This is an action item. Ms. Rising, will you please begin?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. This agenda item presents an update on the field test findings of the mild to moderate support needs, MMSN, and extensive support needs, ESN, California Teaching Performance Assessments, as well as a summary of the education specialist design team meetings and development process of these performance assessments. This item is organized into 3 components. Component 1 provides a brief review of the MMSN and ESN CalTPA field test outcomes and a summary. Component 2 provides foundational information about the standard setting process for the MMSN and ESN TPAs, presents recommendations for passing score standards and final staff analysis. And component 3 provides a timeline describing how the Commission and its technical contractor, Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson, will support MMSN and ESN programs to prepare for the first year of operational administration for candidates enrolling in these programs, starting July 1st of 2022, with the operation of the assessment beginning this summer and into the fall. Our slide deck needs to go to the next slide.
Actually, really quickly, we're hearing an echo here. I'm not sure if someone has their volume on their, I don't know if maybe the volume is on one of your laptops.
It was off.
Can you advance the slide?
Should I test? Do we hear it now? Yes, we still hear it.
It's mine.
Just plug this to see if it works.
Okay, we're going to take 1 second here, and while we're doing that, if you can look at the slide and be reminded of the three components.
Try now.
Excellent. Okay, our technology issue has been resolved, I believe.
Yes, I think it has. Thank you.
Do we want to remove the small message in the middle of the screen? It's not on your computer, but it's up there, I guess. Does that matter? No.
Minimize. Open this up. Go to your PowerPoint.
This one? No.
There's a. I want to see this screen here. I'm sorry.
I know why, because she plugged this in.
Please continue with your lunch. Talk amongst yourselves, and we will be right with you.
And then minimize. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Close out of that.
Okay, then plug in. All right.
Can you tell where I'm going? Hold on.
We're hoping.
Yeah, and then we'll just have to pull up the presentation.
It's not.
So,
Stop the screen share on here and then pull up the presentation on your.
Which one?
You should be able, yeah, this one should be fine. So,
But it's not. It's not coming up.
could you go to settings on your bottom left? And then settings, backlog, yep, and system. And then scroll down. And then from extend display, do duplicate. And keep changes. Share this screen. And then, oh no, I know. And then on the Zoom, you'll have to share that. It's a two-step process.
How about now?
even better. All right, thank you for your patience. I do appreciate that. I think our technology is back. So moving along, we do have three components in this agenda item, and we will be walking through each component. I want to start with just a little bit of background for you. So back in August of 2018, at your meeting, you adopted Standards and Teaching Performance Expectations, TPEs, for the MMSN and the ESN Education Specialist Credentials. And in April of 2019, you adopted the authorization statements for these Education Specialist Credentials. In addition to those adoptions for those credentials, you acted in December of 2020 to make the successful demonstration of proficiency on a performance assessment for education specialist candidates a requirement for these new 5 credentials. So Education Code 44259 was amended to include this requirement for earning an education specialist credential. Moving forward in time to April of 2021, at the commission meeting, you heard an update on the development of the teaching performance assessment for education specialists, the CalTPA model, and a summary of design team meetings from February, when we began with that group, 2020 in person, to March of 2021. And you heard about guiding principles for the continued development of this assessment and fall 2020 pilot study data that were presented at that time. You also approved staff recommendations to do the following. First, to confirm the expectation that MMSN and ESN credential programs begin their administration of the EdTPA, the Ed Specialist CalTPA in the fall of 2022, coming up. Secondly, you added an additional year for us to continue to work with our colleagues in the early childhood special education community, the deaf and hard of hearing community, and the visual impairments community to develop their performance assessments along the same structure of having cycle 1 and cycle 2 and allowing an extra year for field testing for those low incidence areas. And finally, 3, you directed staff to include successful demonstration of proficiency on a performance assessment as a requirement for those 5 credentials in its regulation rulemaking package, which established the new education specialist credentials and bridge authorizations, helping those from the 7 come into the 5. And the regulations were recently approved on May 31st, 2022. In May, in addition to the work that happened over the last 2 years to develop these assessments for MMSN and ESN and the work done for the 3 low incidence areas, there was an additional review conducted by for the MMSN and ESN assessments that consisted of 2 separate analyses, a content review of the assessments for compliance with the Commission's assessment design standards. So a review of the content and a review to make sure the assessments are meeting the assessment design standards. The content review was conducted by subject matter experts for SPED programs and was based on those assessment design standards, particularly on design standard number 1, which looks at validity and fairness. Reviewers who conducted this study found that each task on both assessments and their associated rubrics measure 2 or more TPEs as required, and that collectively the tasks and rubrics for each assessment were found to address key aspects of the 6 major domains of the teaching performance expectations, and the performance assessment properly documented the relationships between TPEs, the tasks candidates engage in, and the rubrics used to score. Both assessments were found to have clearly met all the requirements in the standards, both meaning cycle 1 and cycle 2 in the CalTPA model where we have 2 instructional cycles. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, James Webb, who will take us through component 1 and speak to you about the development of the 2 instructional cycles, the rubrics, and our work with the design team. James?
Thank you, Amy. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you. I'm excited to share the first component of this agenda item. On the screen, both those of you who are watching at home and also here in the commission room, we have the breakdown of how component 1 is divided, and I will be going through and referring you to information that is contained in the item for further review. The first thing I would like to do is talk about our education specialist design team meetings. You can see the 23 members who were on the design team in Appendix A of the item. They represented all 5 credential area programs, as well as a diverse representation of faculty, teachers, induction directors from across the state of California. In addition, we had a representative from the California Department of Education representing the Special Education Division and the English Language Development Division, and we also had a parent volunteer who joined us as well. Over the course of the 2 years, you'll see that there were several things that the design team did to work with commission staff and also our colleagues at Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson. And some of the highlights that I would like to draw your attention to is that the design team worked to adopt the structure that was already in place with the general education CalTPA in order to be aligned with the 2015 Task Force Report on Special Education that stated that all teachers are teachers of all students, and that special education students are indeed students who are general education students. They also confirmed the 2 new assessments met the Commission's assessment design standards through an internal analysis that also was confirmed, as Amy said, at the during the May review of the cycles. They also developed the analytic rubrics that align with the universal TPEs, as well as both the MMSN and ESN specific TPEs for candidate scoring. and it resulted in 8 rubrics for Cycle 1 and 9 rubrics for Cycle 2. We also shared with them the pilot study and field test data, in which they reviewed both the quantitative, the rubric scores of the candidates, as well as qualitative review of candidate, coordinator, and assessor feedback. They also review and adopted the Bias Review Committee's recommendations prior to the pilot test and prior to the field test, to integrate the findings of the Bias Review Committee to ensure that the assessment did not contain any language or any references that might be a barrier to all who are taking the assessment. They learned about the online submission system. They provided feedback to the Commission staff on how to support programs in order for the operational administration to take place. They review and provided feedback also to Commission staff about the program guide, all of which you do have a copy at your seats, and there is also a program guide available online for those of you who are watching this meeting virtually. And they developed the criteria for both the MMSN and ESN assessor qualifications. What I'd like to do now is to go into the structure of the Education Specialist CalTPA for both mild to moderate and extensive support needs. As I said before, the design team built specifically on the structure of the General Education CalTPA, and that was intentional planning because both the MMSN and ESN credentials are held to the universal TPEs as well as the credential specific. So as you can see on your screen, the idea that all teachers are teachers of all students, you'll see that the same cycle plan, teach and assess, reflect and apply, is held throughout both Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 of the MMSN and ESN cycles, instructional cycles. We know that this 2-cycle structure informs that educative quality of assessments and mirrors the structure of the General Education CalTPA. Note that we heard earlier that the cycles are completed in the candidate's clinical student teaching placement, or in the case of our education specialist teacher candidates, often in intern settings that we will see a little bit later when we look at that data. Each instructional cycle does take several weeks to complete, but candidates engage in work that is indicative of the job, and supervising teachers as well as university supervisors are there to guide and coach candidates as they go through the process. As I said before, the rubrics are aligned to both the universal TPEs as well as the credential-specific TPEs. Candidates receive coaching, and another feature to this instructional guide, as it also is in your program guide, a glossary of terms that is used for the candidates and for programs is included. I'd like to add a side note that we are excited to say that both our General Education CalTPA as well as our Education Specialist CalTPA all have the same glossary of terms, and we are bringing that into the development of the early childhood performance assessment as well. And so we are just excited that all the language will be used throughout so that there is that transparency of information for our candidates. As you can see on the screen and in the item, Instructional Cycle 1 is titled Learning About Students with IEPs and Planning Instruction. I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights that are in the agenda item. In Step 1, candidates are reviewing their students' IEPs from their caseload, and they are going to select 3 students, one of whom is an English learner, or possibly someone who is receiving language services through their IEP and has a language goal. The second student whom they select is a student who has a physical, academic, or emotional goal in their IEP, or who is possibly receiving related services. They could be twice identified, or they could be receiving multiple services with a primary disability and served by a secondary disability. The third student whom they select is a student for whom there has been possibly a trauma inside or outside of the classroom, or a identifying factor that they want to know more about that's not listed in the IEP. In the field test studies, this tended to be students who were in a foster home placement, students who identified as LGBTQ, or it could also be students who are experiencing some form of homelessness. Once they have determined who they are going to be planning, they then select a grade level content standard and design one lesson, incorporate how they will utilize instructional support personnel such as general education teachers, behaviorists, paraprofessionals, or other adults who are providing service in the classroom. They show how they will incorporate Universal Design for Learning, the inclusion of ELD standards and goals in order to help scaffold and provide instructional adaptations for learning. In step 2, teach and assess, this is where they video record themselves and they demonstrate how they are incorporating these different aspects of their lesson plan through providing a safe and equitable environment for learning. For our mild to moderate and ESN candidates, I'm going to go ahead and speak to it now. There are considerations for students in terms of sensory accommodations and also the need for space, especially with our students who are receiving services through possibly medical and or orthopedic impairment. They conduct this one lesson and they showcase how they are scaffolding instruction, providing those instructional adaptations, and also working with support personnel. In step 3, they reflect on their lesson by citing evidence back to the first 2 steps, and they answer specific prompts where they detail the efficacy of their lesson and how they can determine what worked well and what they need to work on as they move forward. In the apply section, candidates are invited to, again, cite evidence from steps 1, 2, and 3, and do so in a way that applies learning to future situations. If I were to do this again, what would I do differently? But there's a specific section on how they might utilize instructional support personnel differently, how they might have small groups if that's what they determine is a need as opposed to delivering whole group instruction. In cycle 2, you can see that it is assessment-driven instruction for students with IEPs. Again, step 1 plan is really where the bulk of what they're doing is concentrated, because those of us who are teachers and have been in the classroom, that's where we always start, and that's generally where we concentrate a lot of our efforts. So they gather contextual information about their students from their caseload. This time they are planning a 3 to 5 lesson segment using a grade level content standard that they are going to deliver and incorporate assessments, informal, student self-assessment, and a formal assessment, and what they are going to do to incorporate those in the planning. In the teach and assess, they teach the lessons to their whole class or small learning group. A particular note for our ESN candidates, in step 2, they do have the ability to showcase their work with one student, even though they are planning for all students on their caseload and taking into consideration the different levels of development. They video record and annotate the clips, and again, what they're looking at is incorporated use of educational technology. They are also looking at the ability to facilitate instructional support personnel, and they are able to demonstrate how they are infusing the assessments as they're working with students. In Reflect, this time, unlike Cycle 1, they actually look at the results of the formal assessment and also take themselves to the self and the informal assessments to see, was I able to look at the data that was coming forward before the formal assessment? Once they make that determination and they look at how the students completed the lessons, they decide then in step 4 if they need to reteach or if they need to provide an extension activity. Reteaching would be they notice that there's something that a student or students struggled with and they want to provide additional instruction, or extension meaning that they mastered the standard and they needed some development in exploring it further. I'd like to now take your attention to the analytic rubrics. These are provided in Appendix B with our essential questions, but I have put one set from Cycle 1 up here for you to see. I realize it's a little small, but just know that they are delineated in your appendix. The analytic rubrics, as I said, the design team worked on, contain multiple constructs that addresses an essential question. Here you can see that for Cycle 1, there are 4 rubrics and 4 essential questions for planning. Again, the planning meaning the strong focus in Cycle 1. There are then 2 essential questions for Step 2, 1 for Step 3, 1 for Step 4, and that's where we get the total of our 8 rubrics for analytic scoring. You can see the way it's delineated. They are scored from 1 to 5. I don't like to say that 1 is failing and 5 is passing. Instead, it is a continuum, as we know exists in terms of teacher practice. 1 is an absence of evidence. It is looked at that if a candidate has struggled with providing evidence, that they might find themselves in a score 1. It doesn't mean that we are, the ship's going down and we don't want to save them. Instead, it's pointing out what they can work on to develop their practice. Level 3 is generally where most candidates want to locate themselves, and then in order to get a score of 4, candidates would have met all of the constructs of level 3 plus additional constructs in 4. For a level 5, they've met the constructs in 3 and 4, and then additional constructs for level 5. As I said, the essential questions are provided in Appendix B, and this is an example of what one of our analytic rubrics looks like. You'll see the essential question is at the top. We have the levels of constructs underneath each one. Candidates are then directed to what evidence they would submit in order for it to be scored. And finally, the correlation to both the universal and the credential-specific TPEs. What I'd like to go into next is the field test summary. You'll see that in the item, we had specific criteria for the selection of programs to participate. Appendix C provides the table listing all of the programs that were in the field test. This is found on page 6 of your agenda item. We had a total of 27 programs, resulting in a diverse group of candidates. And in that, we provided a great deal of support through office hours, webinars, and video tutorials. By April of 2022, the candidates provided scorable evidence that was then assessed, and I will get into what the assessment process looked like. The field test began in October of 2021, ran through April of 2022. It provided marker papers, which were exemplars or training papers that the assessors would then use for the purposes of training on both the MMSN and ESN scoring criteria. The target number of candidates was 140, 80 for MMSN, 40 per cycle, 60 for ESN. You can see on the table as well as table 1. We actually had a total number, we actually exceeded our target. So we had 108 candidates for MMSN and 86 for ESN. And then by cycle 1 had 58, cycle 2 had 50 for MMSN, and then in ESN we had cycle 1 46, cycle 2 40. We also included information about program pathways for the field test. Not surprising, the majority of the candidates who participated were from intern programs, and with the next group being those who are in a university student teaching program. As we think about the way that we move forward with assessor training, the assessors were recruited over the course of months before the field test concluded. They were divided into 2 groups, one to score cycle 1 and a second group for cycle 2. The processes were developed and implemented in the spring through online experiences. They went through a great deal of training in reading the assessments, but they were also given a 90-minute implicit bias training prior to going into the review of the submissions, and this implicit bias module was facilitated by commission staff and the lead assessors to help assessors identify their own biases and encouraging assessors to be aware of scoring bias and to strive to minimize this issue when scoring submissions. Once assessors were trained, they were independently scored by assessors who met the calibration criteria. Table 3 shows the assessor training, which I have up here on the monitors, and it shows you the dates of when we completed the training, the number of marker assessors, and then eventually the number of assessors. The next piece, before I turn it over to our colleagues with Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson, is to look at the survey and focus group data summary that we have provided for you on page 7. When we went and reviewed our field test findings, they were informed by several data points. They included our quantitative data, which was the way candidates scored on the MMSN and ESN cycles. We also looked at the distribution of cycle scores and also demographics of our candidates. As you can see, we looked at and interviewed both teacher candidates, program coordinators, and our assessors. This was done through survey and focus group data. And you can see on page 8 the themes that ran across the different areas. And I'd like to just call out a couple of them as they then correlate to how the design team was informed of this information to further their work. You'll see that the candidates said that they felt that there needed to be more inclusion of life and functional skills in the correlation with standards so that candidates would have a more accurate representation of working with certain populations. Mainly what we heard was our adult transition centers and the inclusion of those skills with students. They also asked for the increase and length of video clips for our ESN populations, as they said that there was sometimes challenges in getting students to come along because of behavior issues or other items for consideration. If you look at what our coordinators said, they wanted further clarity in the program guide for the terms we were using, such as asset-based instruction, funds of knowledge, and cultural and linguistic resources, and also to provide examples of scenarios including co-teaching, co-facilitation, implementation of UDL, and the facilitation of instructional support personnel. Our assessors, when they were surveyed, said that they would like to see more information around manageable and appropriate goals that are also grade level, appropriate to ensure candidates create standards-based IEP and/or lesson goals. In addition, they said that there needed to be more opportunities for candidates to reflect in their coursework, and they encouraged programs to provide more opportunities for this in their clinical experience and their coursework. So we took all the information, presented it to the design team, and these are some things that we added in that are important as we revise the instructional guides for operational administration. The first one is we added the specific inclusion of life skills and functional skills into the prompts. We did increase the video clips by 2 minutes in the ESN to allow for that additional time that was requested. In the program guide, it is still under development, but we have included further information around UDL. We've also added information specific to working with students with disabilities who are also English language learners and need assistance with this. We've also provided examples that are specific to candidates that would be in situations such as co-teaching, adult transition centers, and in intern placements. And the other piece is that we provided clarity on Cycle 1 and Cycle 2 on cultural assets and strengths. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Heather Klesch at Evaluation Systems Group of Pearson, who is going to speak to you about Component 2 and the standard setting process.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. And thank you, Amy and James, for having Dr. Twing and I here to contribute to this item. As the technical contractor for the Commission, Evaluation Systems is responsible for the preparation, convening, the facilitation, and the reporting of the standard setting activities for the education specialist teaching performance assessments. And it was understood by the panelists that convened that their recommendations would be brought to the Commission as just that, recommendations, for which additional considerations may be discussed, and that ultimately a passing standard would be established as determined by the Commission's action. On the next slide, we're going to provide the framing of the standard setting process itself. The Commission's assessment design standards require the conducting of a standard setting study to establish the requirements for successful completion of the assessment. So standard setting is a common term used in the large-scale assessment industry to describe the process of determining a minimum passing score for new or revised assessments. The term standard, as it is used in standard setting, really refers to a performance standard or minimum level of acceptable performance on an assessment. Standard setting is a common and established process for determining valid and defensible minimum passing scores for standardized assessments. And these activities contribute to the validity evidence that we gather in developing the education specialist CalTPA. For criterion referenced assessments such as these, where you need to meet a criteria to pass and you aren't judged or scored in relation to others, standard setting is a content-focused, structured process in which a panel of content area experts, our panelists, review the content of an assessment. They carefully consider the performance expectations being measured and the relevant data and potential pass rates at various scores to make an informed judgment about the minimum performance level that candidates would need to demonstrate to pass the assessment. So 2 panels of experts were convened in May, one for MMSN and a separate one for ESN. And the expert judges that were involved in the process are educators in the field and are listed in Appendix D. We appreciated hearing from some of these panelists earlier today in the public comment. On the next slide. We've got the specific guiding questions. So the specific standard setting process that we use during the meetings is described in full detail in Appendix E. All of the expert panels' standard settings discussion for both the initial and the final passing score recommendations that were made at the conclusion of the activity were really framed in this context statement and guiding question. So I'm just going to focus, I'm not going to read it, but I will focus on a couple areas of these questions, really focusing around the framing of being just at the level of knowledge and skills. So not highly accomplished, not, you're well above, but just at that level. We're also focusing on the framing of this being a new education specialist teacher in California. So again, not a veteran educator being on the job for many years, but new. And then finally, we ask about the score that represents the level that would be achieved as opposed to should be achieved. So we try to ground the panel in that discussion around would. This guiding question really addresses the candidate performance across all rubrics in each cycle. Discussion was conducted also to allow for panel, to have the panel discuss and recommend concerns and discussions around any kind of side conditions, in addition to this question about what score represents the level of performance that would be achieved by this individual. Side conditions such as placing a limitation on the number of rubric scores of 1 was part of our discussion as well, and that would ultimately be part of their recommendations made to us. On the next slide, just presenting to you the table that you have in your item. This data was presented to panelists through a facilitated discussion. Panelists had information for MMSN or ESN candidate performance data from the field test. You have this data in Appendix F for MMSN and Appendix G for ESN. We conducted all of the activities described in Appendix E for the standard setting, and using data such as this and the discussion, each panelist individually made an initial passing standard recommendation during early activities on day 2. This table shows panelists' initial score recommendations, which show the credential area of emphasis, the total score points possible, the panel initial passing score recommendation, and then the number of panelists recommending a side condition of no more than 1 rubric score of 1. As James mentioned, we have in cycle 2, we have 1 additional rubric. So cycle 1 has 40 points possible, cycle 2 has 45 points possible. Therefore, we expected to receive an initial and final passing score recommendation slightly higher on cycle 2 to account for the additional points possible. On the next slide, through a facilitated discussion and after examining those initial recommendations, panelists were also presented with what we call impact data, which reflect the number and % of candidates who would theoretically pass at each potential recommended cut score. These data are presented to you in Appendix H of the item. And those modeled pass rate data and discussion around the impact data and the performance and pass rates by demographics such as ethnicity, gender, and language led to asking panelists then to make a final recommendation for a passing score both for MMSN and separately ESN by individual cycle. Amy, I know you'd like to add some context to this section of the presentation and the data on page 11, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. So yes, on page 11, we wanted to be very careful to point out the limitations of the field test and to just put forward, as we did when we worked with our standard setting panel, some thinking that really needed to be very clear and in the front of our minds as we move through the discussion. And so I wanted today to also make sure that we took time to walk through these caveats. So standard setting panelists were advised that the field test was conducted with candidates and programs that agreed to try out the assessments for the sake of contributing to a development, right? So they were volunteers doing this. And so we wanted to point out that perhaps issues of motivation could have influenced candidate performance in the completion of the assessments, as it was not needed to gain a preliminary credential. Now, this could have gone either way. They could have been the ones who raised their hands that were really eager and excited and completely willing to engage, or it could have been candidates that did it and maybe weren't too sure why and maybe didn't feel as motivated. We really don't know. But we do want to keep in our minds that at this time, which is unique to when we were working on our redeveloped CalTPA, it was required for those candidates. In this field test, it was not required. So they're completely doing this for the sake of research. So we thank all of those candidates that agreed and programs to work with us. In addition, commission staff reminded panelists that they needed to be cautious when applying the field test impact data to future performance of candidates due to the small size of the samples. So while we invited every single accredited program to join us and every single candidate that wanted to complete to do so and to submit, you saw the data that we were able to get, and we can also remember the context of the time. Here we are coming out of the pandemic. Not the easiest time. Nonetheless, we had enough to run the field test with our 58 candidates for MMSN and our 40 for ESN. It is hard to determine if these small sample sizes represent the larger population of candidates. So the data, while helpful in providing feedback for development of the assessments, development of the guides you were just handed, it may not yet be fully representative of the performance of the larger populations. So we just wanted to make sure that our standard setting panel educators who joined us were very aware of these facts. So for our mild to moderate sample, as we look at the data that's provided for you in your appendices, and we look at cycle 1, most submissions that were scored were completed by candidates who identify as white, non-Hispanic. That largest N was 22 candidates. The second largest group who participated identified as Mexican American Chicano. We had 15. The rest of the ethnic groups represented 6 or fewer candidates. Now, typically when we're looking at data sets, we don't report data for less than 10 because of this volatility to the data. We don't really know if it's representative or not, and we typically wouldn't present it. However, the data we have is the data we have, the candidates engaged, and we wanted to put that data in front of the panel to be completely transparent about the current initial performance. So it was critical for the panelists to understand the performance of candidates who did participate in the field test. For the ESN sample, for example, we had no submissions from candidates who identified as Black African American, Japanese American, Asian Indian American, Asian Indian, Cambodian, and I can't read anymore. And Filipino American Filipino. So we did not have any candidates of these identities. The impact data set does document, however, when we do look at who we were able to score, that Mexican American Chicano candidates scored higher than any other ethnic group, followed by white candidates, and then followed by Latino candidates. In the field tests, moving on then to our gender question, more female submissions were scored than male, and you'll see that in the data set in the appendices, or by those choosing not to respond to the gender identifying question. And across both assessments, females scored higher than males or non-gender identifying candidates. When analyzing the data for candidates with 2 or more languages, when we looked at that identifier, more English-only submissions were scored for MMSN, Cycle 1. English-only candidates performed slightly higher than candidates with English and 1 or more languages. For Cycle 2, however, it was the opposite. For candidates who have more English-only submissions were scored. However, for this cycle, candidates with English and more than 1 language performed slightly higher than their English-only candidates. So in Cycle 1, English-only slightly higher. Cycle 2, those with more than 1 language slightly higher. And this was also true in the ESN data sets for those candidates. So again, that same pattern. In Cycle 1, English only slightly higher. In Cycle 2, candidates who had more than 1 language slightly higher. All of this demographic data is provided for you in the appendices, and we're happy to look at it in more depth as we move on through the presentation. And we wanted to let you know that for all the submissions we had, we provided all of that data for you and for our standard setting panelists. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Heather, to finish up this part of component 2.
Thanks, Amy. So in this next slide, going back to the performance data that was shared with the panelists, this table provides the candidate total mean score, standard deviation, median or the middlemost score, the minimum and the maximum scores achieved by MMSN and ESN candidates for both cycles 1 and 2 during the field test. And what this data shows is comparable candidate performance between MMSN and ESN cycle 1. However, cycle 2, which has that additional rubric, so more points possible, we see that MMSN had a higher mean score than ESN. On the next slide, as I mentioned, panelists had opportunity to discuss the data, their own initial recommendations, the inferences of the impact data on their recommendations, and ultimately come to their own final recommendation. A couple notes about that. Standard setting really is an iterative process. We lead panelists through various steps of evidence and information and discussion to arrive at this individual, independent final passing score recommendation. So we do not ask panelists to come to consensus, but we are transparent about where panelists are in terms of their initial recommendation. And then ultimately, we gather their final passing score recommendation as shown here. And we conclude the meeting then by showing the panelists the frequencies of their final recommendations. So they left knowing where they fell out as a panel in terms of their recommendations. We also gave them information on a summary of the side condition recommendations as shown here and their impact on candidate pass rates. And with that, now I will hand it over to Dr. John Twing to discuss the standard error of measure considerations, which begin on page 13 of your agenda item.
Thanks, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. So a standard error is what a psychometrician uses to quantify uncertainty of a measure. That uncertainty in the measure might come from any number of things. It might come because the candidate woke up on the wrong side of the bed that day and was having a bad day. It might become because the candidate got stuck in traffic on the way to the assessment, became frustrated and was running late and was very anxious. For us non-traditional candidates, it's often a senior moment. Regardless of why that uncertainty exists, what it does is it causes us to be unsure whether or not we're presenting our best performance on an assessment. And typically, the CTC is taking into consideration this area of uncertainty. So if you think about a panel's recommendation of a cut score, you think about a zone over that cut score that represents this uncertainty. In order to benefit, to make sure no candidate was harmed by setting a cut score in that zone of uncertainty, the CTC has in the past used the standard error measurement as an adjustment for that cut score, all to make sure that a candidate's not denied an opportunity when they shouldn't be. Go on to the next slide, please. Here what you can see are the recommended scores applying the 3 different standard error measurement zones. For cycle 1, cycle 2 of both SN, and ESN. And in the parentheses then would be the resulting cut scores or standards that would come by application of those standard errors. And just a note, we always round in the favor of the candidate here. So even though 17.83 might go to 18, we rounded it down to 17 again because we want to stay out of that zone of uncertainty so that any decision we make about a candidate doesn't adversely impact that candidate. Next slide, please. Here you can see a look at what would happen, what would be the impact if we took the cut score. Here we're using MMN SN cycle 1 at 17. You can see the highlighted cell 17A. That results from applying a 1 standard error of measurement to the panel recommended standard. And you can see that if that was the standard, 93% of all the candidates would pass the test with no side condition. You can also see then that 93% would pass if you also added the side condition of at most 1 score of 1 on a rubric. This information was also presented to the panelists when they went through their judgments of what the impact were after having great discussions about all of the field test data and all of the implications setting a standard would be. Go to the next slide, please. Good, and it works. So here's cycle 2. Again, a similar concept. The highlighted cells represent what would be the passing standard at a standard of 19, which in this case is 1 standard error of estimate below what the panel would recommend. And then if you look over with the side condition here, again, if you had a side condition of no more than 1, at most 1 on a rubric score, it wouldn't change the outcome. You'd still have a 98% passing rate. Next slide, please. So now you get the similar information on an ESN. This is cycle 1. Again, on cycle 1, because there seemed to be a lot more uncertainty expressed by the panels around the impact of things like motivation, school setting, etc., we're recommending the cut scores in the yellow with a 1.5 standard error measurement band. So you can see here at 15 for cycle 1 with no side condition, that would pass 93% of the candidates. Here you do see an effect from that side condition. If you added the side condition that those candidates weren't allowed to get more than 1 rubric, 1 score of a 1 on a rubric, then only 87% of those candidates would pass. Panelists debated that a lot and argued that in some ways passing with the 1 was onerous, more onerous than passing with just 2s. And that's why they applied that side condition. Go to the next slide, please. And then the last is cycle 2 free SN, and again, very similar. We've applied the negative 1.5 standard error adjustment to the panelist recommendation, so the cut score would be 17. And you would have 98% of your candidates passing without that side condition. Notice that if you don't pass anybody that has a 1 on a rubric, or more than 1 on a rubric, you'd only pass 88% of the candidates. So we'll get to the end. We'll entertain any questions because I know these are a lot of numbers and sometimes can be confusing. I even confused myself a couple of times working with James going through these numbers. So it's easy to be confused. But let's move on to the next slide. I think this is back over to you, isn't it, James?
It is, yes. Thank you, Dr. Twing. Thank you for all of that information. As an English teacher, yes, all the numbers were blowing my mind when we were going through them. I'd like to just bring us to a close with component 3, which begins on page 16 of the item, just to talk about what are the supports that commission staff and our colleagues at ES will have for operational administration. We have weekly office hours that we have started during the field test, but now we have moved to transitional office hours to help programs as they are beginning to work through the processes of implementing the performance assessment for education specialist programs. We also offered transition webinars earlier this month on the 1st and the 2nd, of which we recorded, and we have available to programs. And we also have shared with them the field test materials and the program guide so that they can start their planning for the fall. You'll see that the operational materials orientation will be held on August 31st. We also have our implementation conference that was referenced earlier today in September. We have our kickoff in October. I set up a listserv for all programs that can access information, and I send out notices once a month, and they can sign up much like they can with the PSD e-news. We have our Digging Deeper series, of which we've combined all of our performance assessments, and those will be ongoing. And as Amy indicated earlier, our faculty workshops that we have offered for CalTPA will be extended to our Ed Specialist, CalTPA, and our CalAPA. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Amy with our final staff recommendations.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Dr. Twing. So I'm on page 17 in the item, and if you want to look up at the screen, what I'm going to go through now are the final staff recommendations for your consideration. So the first recommendation we're making is that the Commission adopt the MMSN and ESN CalTPAs for operational administration beginning October of 2022. That's our first recommendation. Our second then moves into the passing standards. That the Commission establish the following passing standards for initial implementation. So for our mild to moderate support needs candidates for Cycle 1, Commission staff recommends the passing standard of 19 points with the side condition of 1 score of 1 allowed. You may only score 1 rubric with a 1 on the 8 rubrics. And that we apply a standard error of measure of minus 1.0, resulting in a final passing score of 17. If you think back to the tables you just looked at with Dr. Twing, you see where those pass rates fall out. MMSN Cycle 2, the recommendation is that the passing standard of 21 points was made by the panel by Commission staff with 1 score of 1 allowed, and that we would apply again the standard error of measure of minus 1.0, resulting now in a passing score of 19. For the ESN candidates for Cycle 1, the data was slightly different, and so the passing standard of 19 points was recommended with the application of a higher standard error of measure of minus 1.5, resulting in a passing score of 15 points for Cycle 1. And for Cycle 2, Passing standard of 20 points is recommended, and again, we would apply that standard error measure of minus 1.5, resulting in a passing score for cycle 2 of 17 points. Our third recommendation, given the data and the critical considerations we need to keep in mind as we think about supporting our candidates in our programs, is that 2 years of data be collected and studied to understand how candidates are performing in the initial years of implementation, and then conduct a second standard setting study review spring of 2024 and come back to you with that data to reconsider and think about where we might want, you all might want to set those passing scores at that time when we've had more time for the programs to understand the assessments, get the support they need, help the faculty learn and the supervising teachers and all the support staff in the districts, help candidates adjust, then we would be back in 2 years. And we would certainly have a much larger data set to look at with you and to make that important consideration. So if next steps are always important to understand, if the commission adopts the recommended passing standards, notification would be posted on the exams website and communicated to the field. And we would continue to offer supports to the field, as James walked you through, and enhance our work as we learn with all of our programs as we move into the first year of implementation, what kinds of additional supports we might offer, what kind of community of learning we can develop, and how we can all together learn about the impact of this assessment. So with that concludes our item, and happy to turn it back to you and answer any questions you have.
Thank you, and thank you for walking us through all of the information and the process. That was very well presented because there's so much there, so thank you. We will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or clicking on the raise hand icon if participating through Zoom, or by pressing *9 if participating by phone. Recording Secretary, are there any public comments?
There are no public comments on this item.
Thank you. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on this item? And I'll start by saying the recommendations on page 17, we are going to go through those individually, if we have maybe general comments or concerns, maybe start with that, and know that we are going to take each of those recommendations separately as we move through. Commissioner De La Torre?
Well, it's more the recommendation I just had a question. Since we have the psychometrician here, I'm just curious. So for MMSN, it says that there's a passing score with 1 score of 1 allowed. But for the ESN, it just says that there's a passing score. Does that mean that for ESN, they can have more than 1-1?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so what is the rationale for having the additional stipulation of only 1 score of 1 for MMSN?
Yeah. I think it has to do, if I reflect back at what the panel's discussions were, it had to deal with there was a great deal more uncertainty around ESN and the take-up of ESN in the prep programs. Same with motivation on ESN. That debate there was some of that debate on NMSM, but not to the extent. I don't know, Amy, do you recall what the panels?
Yeah, so I think the other caveat that we didn't get into too much in this item is that for our general education population, for the multiple subjects candidates and single subject candidates, their passing standards are 19 and 21 for cycle 1 and cycle 2 right now, with the side condition of no more than 1-1 per. So they had that in their mind going in as well, since we have so many candidates in dual programs, both trying to attain both credentials simultaneously. There was just some discussion about parity, really. Now, the other thing we'll point out, because we were able to give you the assessment guide, if you were to look at and open up to the rubrics, I would draw your attention, and this was exactly what we did with our panelists. As a matter of fact, they brought this much more strongly to the forefront in their discussion. But if you were to open in either guide, or if we're in cycle 1, you can find that one, and you go to our rubrics that are provided here in the back, starting on page 25, and you just take a second and look at the language in level 1. And if you flip through and continue to read the language in level 1, their feeling was, especially given the robustness of the early performance in this, our education specialist candidates performed really well. Even when we think about our data for Gen Ed, they are really hitting it out of the park, so to speak. So anyway, they were looking at the level 1 description of practice and feeling that a candidate who across these rubrics, given this is an open assessment, there are supports, it is done together, there is peer review. We provide examples of submissions that a level 1 performance happening twice was a little uncomfortable for them, and they wanted to have that proviso that you could only get a score of 1 once. In the ESN world, however, the performance was not as necessarily strong when we looked at that data with applying the side condition of not allowing more than 1-1, and because it is new, they wanted to remove that side condition for now and provide that extra support to the candidates. So in a couple of years, they might come back and look at that again and think again about, well, if we're doing this for Gen Ed and for MMSN, is this also something we would like to do here or not? So that in a nutshell was the discussion.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, my question was because why have that? Because this is it's a beginning.
Correct.
For teachers to start, right?
Yes.
So I'm thinking when you're starting out, you're going to get better.
Yes.
So why have that limitation of 1 score of 1? Because if you have too many scores of 1, you're not going to get the cutoff score.
Correct.
Right. It's going to be really hard to get that cutoff score. So by removing that only 1 score of 1, because it's already okay to not have that additional provision for ESN, that would only help teachers. It wouldn't hurt anybody.
Can we go back to the data table? Part of the rationale as well with the commission was that it's exactly the same. So even if we have the no more than 1-1 rule in place, the passing is the same at 93%.
For all of them? I thought
Yes.
I saw some that were not.
Well, for ESN, it is not that way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So go ahead and let's just go there. So because it's hard to remember all these numbers, go to the ESN and go to the yes.
I
So
see.
you see when we applied it there,
Oh, I see.
we're now some candidates will not pass.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you.
And that's exactly why they did it that way. That's why it's side condition for one, no side condition for the other in support of candidates and programs.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Simmons? Okay. Do other commissioners have more general questions before we go on to the individual recommendations? Yeah, Commissioner Heredia?
So when I read this, I was really struck by if you speak more than 1 language, your score was higher. I have my own thoughts about why that might happen, but do you have any thoughts about why that might have happened?
Who would like
Do you want me to go?
Please go right
Well,
ahead, John, and I'll follow up.
Well, number one, it's unique to California. We don't see patterns of data like that very much elsewhere at all. And it causes one to speculate that your very diverse cultural school system has exposed everybody multiple languages. It's just common nature here to speak multiple languages. And so that there's not a learning deficit like we see in other state programs that are differentiated by languages. We do know on some of the cognitive assessments that multiple languages are highly correlated with other levels of high achievement. So California is trending in a direct direction of the rest of the world as well. But I haven't seen any specific data for California in that regard.
Yeah, your last comment is what I speculated too. I mean, we know that speaking a second language, that students in schools will outscore those with speaking 1 language on some assessments. So that when I read that, I thought bilingual education is working. Retaining home language, dual immersion schools are working. You know what I'm saying? Just that whole emphasis, because you do. You're more analytical in some respects. Thank you.
I could just add that in our data that we'll bring to you in August for our CalTPA candidates, same trend. Same trend, more powerfully in the data.
Commissioner Gross?
Thank you. So I've had the unique opportunity to both serve as a design team member and then when I was appointed to the commission, become a commission liaison. And so I really wanted to appreciate Amy and James, your work in shepherding what I think most of us thought was impossible. The ask was huge for a 2-year turnaround to develop, field test, pilot, go, right? And also, we met for the first time in February of 2020, and then the pandemic happened. And so, I mean, I think your leadership and your ability to keep us connected over Zoom and modeling that for us, I just really appreciate that. And I appreciate, you know, as we had a really lengthy conversation this morning about TPAs, and I think as a teacher, right, going through the credentialing process, sometimes you're like, why do I have to do all of these things? And who makes up all these things, right? And some of my friends were like, you're gonna go do that? Like, why would you do that? And it was so fascinating to me to be a part of this development and how inclusive of so many voices. And every time we met and said, I have concerns about this. What about this one outlier student who maybe, you know, is teaching in a rural area and only has this? How are we going to accommodate? Just the community concern for our candidates' well-being, and one of the things that our team members said this week was we found a way to uniquely address the universal TPEs and the unique needs of education specialists, and really create this robust assessment that shows all students are general education students, and that our education specialists are highly qualified education professionals who aren't always perceived as that. And we got a chance to see some videos, and they can do it, right? And that is very exciting for this field. So I just really wanted to appreciate your responsiveness to the field and your reflection and your ability to do that and meet a deadline in a pandemic. In light of our conversation this morning, thinking about context and how important context is, you know, and that we don't have a lot of data around context, I'm curious, and I have mixed feelings about this, to be honest, but would we want to include in our ANOVA analysis of this data, what are score differentials based on your placement? Does it matter if you're an intern, if you're a resident, if you're a student teacher in your passing of the scores? Does it matter the length of your program? Right, there are consequences on the other side of that data. You know, so I put it out here with a caution. But I also think we might have some own implicit biases about who is well prepared and who isn't. And we have our retention data, but I wonder if this might help us kind of figure out if some of those biases are correct, or if there's another factor with our retention data around why our interns leave, or if there is, I don't know. So that's just my wondering of if that's something we should pursue in our data analysis in this work.
Yeah, so if you open your item to page 29, you can see the data right there. So we have our passing mean scores. Down at the bottom it says pathway, or at least one of your wonderings. So you can see how our district interns did. So their mean scores were 27.4, residency 28, university intern 25.9, university teaching program 26.3. So you can see just in this very small, and we have to always remember this is a small data set. It will grow more robust for us over time. We are looking carefully at that data and these questions. Right above it, you can see our language mean scores. And if you go 1, 2, 3 columns over, right, mean, and you just run your eye down, and you can round up if you want or whatever, but you're looking at these scores, right? And you can see they're pretty darn good. I mean, they're scoring, slightly under 30 points. And we talked about, let's see, this is cycle 2, so we're talking about a passing score of 21 that we're going to apply SEM to, which is going to drop it. So if you just, you look down those scores, so our recommendation was to go, I believe we ended up at, help me, James, you're younger than I am, 17, right? Did we end up? Yeah. So that means, across our demographic data here and across our variables that we're looking at, ethnicity, school setting, language, pathway, you can see who would pass. They are well above the recommended passing standard, well above. But we do watch this data very carefully, and we watch it across the years. And as I said, we will, come back. We will also have our annual report next spring again, and we will draw that data in, and then we'll come in 2 years with even more data. But you're right. When we ask questions and we want data, then we have to be willing to see the answer sometimes. So, we are asking those questions. So thank you for bringing that up.
Commissioner De La Torre?
I just want to point out, looking at this data, that even one standard deviation below every pathway, they're still well above.
That is
great.
Correct. They hit it out of the ballpark.
Yeah.
We were very, very impressed with Megan and her colleagues in the education field. We weren't sure, right? We never know going into this, but very positive start for this community.
I have a question about, and I might be reading too much into this language, but it states in the report that commission staff and ES attempted to recruit a diverse group of candidates for the assessor pool. Mm-hmm. And I know in this past year or so, it was probably difficult to get anyone to do anything above and beyond. But I'm curious, how successful were you in recruiting? And having, to add on to what Commissioner Gross said, having served on a standard setting panel in the past, I know as an educator, it's an amazing opportunity. It informed so much of what I do after I participated in that. So if any educators are out there listening, if you have the opportunity to participate in standard setting or being an assessor in a program like this, do it, because it's so valuable. But I'm just curious if you could speak to how robust was that pool of applicants you got to assess, and going forward, what can we do to further diversify that pool and expand that pool? Yes. And I appreciate that you said you did implicit bias training for that pool, but just making sure that we start out already with a diverse pool of assessors, I think, is important. I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
So in the item again, we did share with you the number. Oh, here it is. So it's table 3. You can see the number of assessors that we worked with. So small numbers for this field test because we were scoring what we had. But we do, again, invite every educator where we have the opportunity to work with to join us. And you're right, during a pandemic, it was a little hard. Our teachers very consumed, obviously, with their students and their families and guardians that are supporting those students. So we are already recruiting for assessors in the fall. We are always trying to make sure that we have a diverse pool. We are always looking for balances across gender, across type of pathway. So we want intern faculty, fifth-year faculty, et cetera, and residency now. And we also look very much to make sure we have a balance with K-12 educators. We talked a little bit about those requirements for assessors. So you have to be in California, holding California credentials, teaching California courses to be even eligible to become an assessor. When we identify you, we can pay you for your time at that point, and we put you through a rigorous calibration process. If you calibrate, you get to score. If you're not scoring for 3 months, you have to recalibrate, et cetera. We have quite a quality management and plan in place there. That being said, we strive for the diversity due to, and Heather is with us from Evaluation Systems, but due to human relations privacy law, we cannot disclose the diversity. But we are doing everything we can, and we certainly have a lot of diversity that we get to see as we do work with people, and we strive to make sure that we are very inclusive. Heather, did you want to add
Amy.
anything? Yes.
Yeah, I'll just add that while, obviously assessors are working with us in a capacity of being employed by us in this work for scoring, we are looking to summarize and provide to the commission a summary of that assessor pool demographics. So that has been requested. We are working internally to compile that and provide that to the commission.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other general questions or comments before we move on to the individual recommendations? All right, seeing none, I think the first thing we're being asked to look at is a motion that the Commission adopt the Education Specialist Mild to Moderate Support Needs and Extensive Support Needs CalTPAs for operational administration beginning October 2022. So is anyone willing to move that at this point? Commissioner Davis?
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Davis. Do I have a second? Second from Commissioner Jackson. Is there any further discussion of that motion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Next, I think we're looking at the passing standards, the scores. So next, do I have a motion that the Commission establish passing standards for initial implementation of the Education Specialist Mild to Moderate Support Needs CalTPA? And for this, I think we have two things, I think, as part of this motion. It would be the MMSN Cycle 1 passing standard, and whether or not we're doing, or what the standard error of measure would be and what the passing score would be, and then for Cycle 2. So am I correct? We're packaging, I think, that as part of one motion. So staff has given us a recommendation for those two cycles. Would anyone like to either further discuss that or move? I'm not sure who I saw first. Commissioner Davis, I think.
I wanted to move.
Okay, so you're making a motion to approve the staff recommendation there, and was that a second? Okay, so I have a motion by Commissioner Davis, a second by Commissioner De La Torre. Is there any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Okay, next, do I have a motion that the Commission establish passing standards for initial implementation of the Education Specialist Extensive Support Needs CalTPA? And again, there are the two recommendations, one for Cycle 1, one for Cycle 2. Any discussion or motions there? Okay, I'll go with Commissioner De La Torre. I think you guys tied. I'll go with Commissioner De La Torre first on that one. Was that a motion? Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second? All right. Second from Commissioner Davis. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. Finally, do I have a motion to direct Commission staff to collect and study 2 years of data to understand how candidates are performing and to conduct a second standard setting review study in spring of 2024? Commissioner Davis?
So moved.
So moved. I have a motion. A second. Commissioner, you guys are tag teaming this perfectly. Oh, yes, and we have Chair Sloan.
And this was with respect to collecting data, as Commissioner Gross was asking as well, and a lot of the questions we've asked, if there are additional types of data that you can think of over the next couple of years that would help us understand questions of context, and that would be very helpful too.
All right, we have, sure.
Make sure I put things on here. So in another agenda item, we noted, or it's noted that, there's a date, like maybe 2 years or 3 years, but then there was an extension of an additional year. I can't remember what agenda item that was, to give it more time. Is that something that this agenda item would benefit from, or do you feel like this is sufficient in the 2 years?
So a year ago, when we brought the pilot test data for MMSN and ESN to you, we were not at the same point in development with our VI colleagues, our DHH, and our early childhood. We asked for an additional year for development and to be able to conduct the field test in a more full way. So remember, in our visual impairments, we have 2 approved programs in the state of California. We were working with 2 programs. So we were trying to give them time and space and honor the way their candidates are coming through in a 2-year program to make sure it was the right time to engage in assessment and things like that. We needed more time. Early childhood, so much going on in the world of early childhood, and we wanted to make sure that what we're doing there is in alignment with what we're doing in all our other aspects of early childhood. Needed more time for that. And then for DHH, same thing. We just needed, we have 5 approved programs with a recent 6th approved program that doesn't yet have candidates but will soon. And so we're working with those 6 programs to really deeply understand the ways we need to think about performance assessment for those candidates. And they have different pedagogical approaches as they take ASL and speech and written language. And so we need to be thinking about all the complexities. We needed another year there. So that's where that extra year came in. So next spring, we'll be back with you with field test data there for those 3 individual assessments that we're building. We started this work in the education specialist with our 5 credentials. We had 7, came down to 5. We thought we could build a performance assessment. Quickly understood with our wonderful design team, no, the pedagogy is very different, obviously, for all of these needs and kinds of things we would like our beginning candidates to know for all of our different types of students. And so we are actually, the commission is developing 5 different versions, 5 unique is the better word, versions. Anyway, that's why we need an extra year for those other 3. We'll be back in the fall, spring with that data for you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any further discussion of the motion? All right, all those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. So thank you, Ms. Rising, Mr. Webb, Ms. Klesch, and Mr. Twing. Appreciate your presentation. And I think that concludes, do we have any additional items in this committee? 3B, oh, how? So wishful thinking. Okay, it doesn't conclude. Let me go backwards in my script. Okay, let's see if I can find 3B. Oh, I do. All right, we're going to carry on. I straight in. All right, item 3B then is the proposed adoption of teaching performance expectations and program standards for the PK3 Early Childhood Education Specialist Credential. This item is being presented by Phyllis Jacobson and Cassandra Henderson. This is an action item, and I'll give our staff time to come up and get ready. But Dr. Jacobson, whenever you are ready, please begin. And again, we'll give you a second there to get settled. All right, whenever you're ready.
All righty. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Commissioners. We are going to try to make this as quick as we can, considering you've had a long day and have a longer one coming up. You may notice that the person sitting next to me is not Cassandra Henderson, but is in fact Amy Rising. Cassandra is not available today to present with us. She has another obligation, and so Amy is graciously filling in.
Could you pause just a minute, Phyllis? I'm just having a little trouble hearing our presenters. Thank you.
So, item 3B addresses 2 remaining components that support the refocused PK3 ECE Specialist Credential. And these 2 components are the job-related teaching performance expectations for candidates and the program standards for preparation programs. These standards assure the quality and effectiveness of the programs in preparing candidates for the credential. As we noted yesterday in our discussion during item 3A, the work to develop the TPEs and the program standards and the drafts of these documents were also presented for information at the April 22, 2022 Commission meeting. And the prior agenda items referring to these topics are presented in Appendix A, the list of the ECE credentialing workgroup members who also worked in this, and the summary of the workgroup meetings are provided in appendices B and C of the agenda item. So as you directed us, we did obtain additional public input following the April 2022 Commission meeting concerning both the TPEs and the program standards. The TPEs were reviewed for further modifications based on the comments received during the April 2022 Commission meeting, as well as the results of the TPEs survey, and Amy will be discussing this information with you shortly. A field survey to gather public input on the draft program standards was conducted during late April and early May of 2022, and I will be discussing that information following Amy's remarks. And with that, I will turn this over to Amy to provide you further information about the TPEs.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The PK-3 Early Childhood Educator Specialist Credential integrates the job role expectations of early childhood educators from preschool through grade 3. Prior to the April 2022 Commission meeting, the draft PK-3 Specialist TPEs, Teaching Performance Expectations, underwent a field review survey conducted by the Glenn Price Group, which helped facilitate the ECE credentialing workgroup meetings. Consistent with all of the other Commission's TPEs surveys, the survey respondents were asked to indicate for each teaching performance expectation domain, we have 6, whether the language of the TPEs in that domain was clear, and if not, what language was unclear, whether any content was missing and should be included in the teaching performance expectation, or conversely, if there was any content in the TPE that should be removed and why, and whether the TPE was directly related to the job role of a beginning PK-3 ECE specialist teacher, and finally, whether the TPE addressed knowledge, skills, and abilities needed by the ECE specialist teacher from day one on the job. Information from the survey was initially provided in the April 2022 ECE agenda item. Since the April Commission meeting, feedback provided by the TPE survey was again reviewed by staff to assure that the draft TPEs reflected the areas of modification suggested by respondents. Feedback provided during the April Commission meeting was also reviewed with respect to comments made concerning the TPEs. As a result of these further reviews, modifications have been made to several of the TPE element statements, particularly with respect to the value and inclusion of play-based activities, both child-led and teacher-facilitated, collaborative two-way partnerships with families and guardians, differentiated instruction, and supportive and interactive positive child-teacher relationships. So the feedback that came to us, we took that as staff, we relooked at those statements, those elements under the 6 domains, and we made revisions. It is fundamental responsibility of educator preparation programs approved by the Commission to assure that candidates have multiple opportunities to learn, practice, and be assessed on their progress towards meeting the TPEs. So this is all happening within program. This is one of the critically important means of assuring that candidates are ready to be recommended for licensure and to begin their professional practice in California's public schools. An entire preparation program standard, Standard 2, Phyllis will come back to the program standards, is devoted to detailing the requirements for the program to demonstrate and document where and how candidates are prepared to learn, practice, and be assessed on their progress towards meeting the teaching performance expectations within the preparation program's coursework and clinical practice. The TPEs with tracked edits are available for you, showing the proposed modifications, and they're in Appendix D of your item, so you can see exactly where language was iterated. A chart showing the major themes of interest to survey respondents as well as to commenters at the April 2022 Commission meeting, and where these themes are addressed across the range of the 6 TPE domains and their sub-elements, is provided for you on pages 6 and 7 in your item. It's important to note, however, that even if a concept or theme is included only once within the TPEs, teacher preparation programs are required, of course, to fully address the concept of the theme, and the number of times a particular concept shows up has no relationship to how fully the theme must be covered. So in other words, these are not weighted. So each time the idea shows up, we're serious about it. We really want candidates to learn it and be able to demonstrate that they understand it and can apply it. So in the chart, the concepts and themes are listed under the domains where they're relevant to focus and to the focus of that domain. It is not expected that each concept or theme would necessarily be applicable across all 6. So we try to be unique in these documents and not repetitive. I would also like to address the development of the new literacy TPEs, which we began our conversation about yesterday, under the provisions of SB 488. There is presently an expert group working to develop these new literacy TPEs. When these are ready and have been adopted by the Commission, the PK3 ECE specialist TPEs will be modified at that time to incorporate the new literacy TPEs. And these literacy TPEs, remember, will impact all of our credentials. Gen Ed, multiple subject, single subjects for our ELA teachers, our 5 education specialist assessments and programs, and early childhood. And the literacy work will be spread across and deeply embedded in all of that. We note that in the interim, programs will still be required to implement the current literacy TPEs adopted by the Commission in 2019 and to prepare candidates to take and pass the RICA, the Reading Instruction Competency Assessment, so that they are prepared to help all children in grades PK through 3 and beyond develop their reading and literacy skills from the first day on the job. And with that, I will turn it back to Dr. Jacobson, who will take you through the program standards.
Thank you, Amy. So I'd like to set a brief context here for the discussion of the proposed program standards. The Commission's role in this process is that you set and you adopt quality and effectiveness standards for educator preparation programs. And then the role of the prospective program sponsors is to design a program that meets each of these standards, but in a manner that best fits their local and institutional context, situations, and their candidate populations, and to submit responses to these program standards for review and approval by the Committee on Accreditation, or the COA. So program standards are slightly different from the TPEs in that they address broad topics such as, for example, the program's overall design and curriculum, opportunities for candidates to learn, practice, and be assessed on their progress towards mastering the TPEs, clinical practice opportunities, and equity and inclusion. But program standards do not prescribe, for example, any particular curriculum, any particular program organizational model, or curriculum delivery mode. But programs are required to indicate how they plan to meet the requirements of each standard, and they do submit a course matrix showing what courses are offered and where the TPEs are introduced, where they're practiced, and where they're assessed within those courses and clinical practice opportunities. Programs also include as basic references for candidates, and we've talked about this yesterday, the foundational set of state-adopted content and performance standards for students, as well as related curriculum frameworks. So in the case of the PK3 ECE specialist, these foundational documents would include the preschool learning foundations and curriculum, and they would include the K3 student standards and frameworks from the Department of Education. However, as I said, program standards are not the same as TPEs. The level of detail regarding what candidates should know and be able to do is provided in the TPEs, not repeated in the program standards. As Amy explained to you, if any concept or theme is in any place, in any part of the TPEs, the program has to address those. So it's not necessary to repeat that information in the program standards to assure that that happens. We're also looking at the program standards for the requirements to make sure that each candidate not only has multiple opportunities to learn and to practice, but that the program has sufficient internal support from its own institution, that there are qualified faculty, and that the infrastructure needed for that program to successfully and effectively operate are available. And so as Amy has indicated to you, these TPEs do not yet include the SB 488 related literacy standards because we don't have those yet to include, but we will in fact include those when those are available and bring these back to you for further review and approval. So we did conduct a public input survey ending in late April. We had that open for 3 weeks, and we asked the same questions that we asked for all other sets of program standards. Is the language of the standard clear? If not, what language is not clear? Is there any content missing from the standard that should be included? And conversely, is there any content included but that should be removed? 465 responses were received to the Program Standards Survey as documented in Appendix F. There was a high level of agreement ranging from a low of 77 to a high of 87% of respondents that these program standards are in fact clear, are appropriate for the credential, and do not need any additional concepts to be added. This is shown in the table on page 3B6. And details, as I said, are provided in the full report in Appendix F. The agenda item text on pages 3B6 through 9 discusses in more detail the various suggestions made by survey respondents, along with the corresponding staff analyses of how these comments relate to the draft standards as proposed in this item. A timeline is also provided in the agenda item on page 3B10, showing the next steps for this work. So based on the positive responses to both the TPEs and the program standards, and with the proviso that when the new literacy TPEs and standards are developed and approved by the Commission pursuant to SB 488, they will be incorporated in these PK3 ECE specialist TPEs and program standards and brought back to the Commission reapproval. And so we recommend that you adopt the proposed teaching performance expectations and program standards for the ECE specialist credential with the specified proviso. This concludes our presentation. We're happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. We will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to give a presentation, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or clicking on the raised hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Recording Secretary, are there any public comments?
Sandra Moll, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Good afternoon. I'm a child development faculty member from Rio Hondo College. Yesterday, your colleague recognized the value of the 24 units of child development and ECE content in his teacher preparation. To expand on that value, as I stated yesterday regarding item 3A, the PK3 Specialist Credential Teacher Performance Expectations must reflect both depth and breadth, including the concepts and content found in both the lower and upper division child development coursework. The standards currently contain only lower division concepts and content. Upper division content needs to be added to further increase the value of child development and ECE in teacher preparation. In addition, CDE, our child development and early childhood education, needs to be added to the multiple subject credential subject matter competencies. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And I should have noted our public comment time is limited to 1 minute. So we'll have the timer going. And Recording Secretary, are there any other public comments?
Christy Dennis, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hello, and thank you. I'm the parent of 2 California students with dyslexia, and I just want to reemphasize the importance for this new program and the standards to incorporate the California dyslexia guidelines. Teacher candidates have to know how dyslexia works and how to recognize the early signs. And although you have been talking about dyslexia in this discussion and in the exhibits, it's not mentioned in the standards. So please do incorporate explicit discussion of dyslexia because it affects so many students, and they cannot, it's great to consider their developmental stages. It's incredibly important, and I applaud that, but the social and emotional impact of not recognizing dyslexia for the vast majority of students who have it and are never identified is incredibly detrimental to their development. So please do include an explicit mention of dyslexia. Thank you.
Lori DePole, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Thank you, Lori DePole from
Co-State Director, Decoding Dyslexia California. Thank you for acknowledging that the new PK through 3 credential will need to meet all the requirements of SB 488. As this important work of SB 48 will be up for approval by CTC in October, DDC is asking you not to approve the proposed TPEs and standards in 3B today, as they will be outdated and need to be revised and have a gaping hole with respect to literacy, especially in the K through 3 classroom. Given the fast timeline on the PK through 3 credential, we're also asking, will the SB 488 expert work group begin the work on the PK through 3 488 literacy standards and TPEs in its meeting next week? Or if for parity purposes, will the multiple subject TPEs and standards under SB 488 be the same for the PK3 credential? Thank you for all your work on this.
Jan Fish, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I want to say that significant work on the development of the TPEs and preparation program standards has been completed, but especially I want to call out the need to deepen both the TPEs in terms of diversity, corroborated by the TPE survey respondents, and also the brand new standard for equity, inclusion, and diversity in light of this morning's conversation especially, and that our field has the asset of being more than 70% BIPOC, women of color. And we want that the treatment by programs to not include disenfranchisement that was a risk noted this morning, and also that TPA data should not eventually give programs data, but give it to them on the backs of BIPOC candidates. So with that in mind, I'm looking at CTC has clearly acknowledged that teacher preparation program models include a 2+2+1 and a 4+1. And we have tremendous opportunity to build a PK3 credential that supports preparation and clinical practice across community college and baccalaureate programs and teacher credential programs. What I want to know is, I'm asking the question, what is the specific role and support for each of the higher ed segments in early childhood child development in the TPAs and TPEs and TPA once available, and the preparation program standards? How is the central role of a baccalaureate program supported, insured, and mandated by CTC, whether the program is located on a 4-year campus in a college of ed or in another college? I want to thank you very much. We in Peach, and as co-lead, I can proudly say we are ready across the field to be engaged with CTC in the continuing work regarding the development of a PK3 credential.
Tony Ayala, please unmute your microphone and share your comment. Tony, we're not able to hear you.
There's 2 unmute buttons. I'm sorry, I did the same thing yesterday. I want to again thank the Commission for all the work that's been done on the PK through 3 credential, including the development of a more robust TPE and TPA and program standards. I do think that there's work to be done, and I'm glad to be part of those conversations ongoing, including the inclusion of the literacy TPE, which will be added. I do want to make it clear that the presentation yesterday is asking for 24 units of ECE or child development in order to meet some of the subject matter competency. Those 24 units will not be enough to meet the entirety of what this program is entailing. And as someone that works with entry-level students looking to further their careers in early education or going into the K-12 system, I still do not see who from the counseling side or advising side would suggest that the PK through 3 credential is the pathway of least resistance. And when we talk about a pathway of least resistance, we're talking about the hours and years to complete as well as the cost. And if this is the proposal, the multiple subject teacher credential with only 24 units of child development would be the clearest route for success for our students. That would suggest that these TPEs are not being valued if put forward without a sunsetting of the multiple subject teacher credentials opportunity to also address this credential. Thank you.
Megan Potente, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Megan Potente. I am a 20-year veteran elementary school teacher. And as has been stated, today, the TPEs and standards are not complete as presented today. They're insufficient. For example, in agenda item 3B, it states that the work group drew from, integrated, and aligned with the current existing literacy TPEs. Yet when we review the proposed PK3 TPEs, there is sadly only one sentence where literacy and reading are even mentioned. This compares to the 4.5 pages of existing literacy TPEs that K3 and above multiple subject teachers and their associated teacher prep programs must meet, including foundational reading skills under 44259B4A. So adopting these today would be a premature move, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Thank you.
Stephanie Simpson, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hi, I am also speaking today as a parent of dyslexic children. It is so important that teacher candidates understand dyslexia. Knowing the signs, acknowledging the importance of early identification is so important. And I'm concerned this has not been addressed well so far with teacher candidates. And it truly is vital, especially considering how many students have dyslexia. Please include the California Dyslexia Guidelines in the TPEs. Thank you so much.
Luis Molina, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Good afternoon, Luis Molina, Policy Analyst for Early Edge California. Dual language learners represent nearly 60% of children birthed to age 5 in our state. With UTK expansion, we have a great opportunity to expand our pool of bilingual teachers to support these young learners in their first 5 years of life, which research shows are most critical for brain and bilingual development. We must ensure we are providing funding and support for teachers to obtain the bilingual authorization through more programs like the 2016 Bilingual Teacher Professional Development Program to allow them to serve in bilingual settings and support children's bilingual development. While we appreciate the inclusion of a focus on multilingual learners in the TPEs, we think there could be a greater focus on culturally and linguistically appropriate practices, home language development, and engaging diverse families. A continued conversation and collaboration is needed with institutes of higher education to design coursework that adequately helps teachers support dual language learners, bilingual, and overall development. Thank you for your continued work on this important issue and for the opportunity to provide public comment.
Please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hi, my name is Donna Cecil. I'm an adjunct in faculty teaching early childhood development at a California community college. I'm also a member of Peach and Tracy ECE. I would like to thank the commissioners for letting me speak today, and I would like to thank Phyllis Jacobson and Amy Rising for updating us on the work done related to the teaching performance expectations and program standards for the PK through 3 Early Childhood Education Specialist Credential. I would like to address Standard 4, Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. I think the Commission can do better than what is written. The standard needs to be more robustly developed. This is not just a course that can be taken or a personal reflection. These concepts must be woven throughout a candidate's academic career. Early childhood education graduates meet this through multiple courses, not just one. Currently, liberal majors do not have multiple coursework that addresses DEI at different levels in understanding. With children of color having the highest rate of expulsion and disciplinary action taken, it is vital for candidates to deeply understand the role of culture in play and in behavior. As written, this standard only provides a superficial understanding of equity, inclusion, and diversity. Thank you.
Tony Isaacs, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hello, my name is Tony Isaacs. I'm the Program Director of PEACH and Adjunct Faculty at Moore Park College. PEACH applauds CTC for its clear centering of the EC credential and child development subject matter to reflect a push-up of ECE knowledge and pedagogy into education of children 3 through 8. PEACH is concerned that the EC credential may not be seen as a viable pathway. Currently, it is common that child development students are advised out of child development and pushed into liberal studies from higher ed advisors and counselors. Since the multiple subject credential holders only need to get 24 units in ECE for an ECE credential, and liberal study majors already meet subject matter for multiple subjects credential and do not need to pass a CSET, this is a much clearer pathway with fewer obstacles. In contrast, while ECE majors meet the subject matter requirements for the ECE credential, they still need to pass the CSET in order to earn a multiple subject credential. This is an inequitable barrier for ECE students who may wish later to earn a multiple subject credential, especially for our first generation students and students of color. This could be avoided if child development and ECE majors meet multiple subject matter content, and if the CSET is not required for ECE students. Let's put equity first and remove barriers for our higher education students of color and our first generation students. Thank you.
Denise Kennedy, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm Dr. Denise Kennedy from California State Polytechnic University in Pomona in Early Childhood Studies. The standards presented here are not for a PK through third grade credential. These standards were pushed down from kindergarten standards into the teacher level of the permit TPEs and kind of morphed, but this is not truly a PK through third standard. This is just TK standards that you're presenting here. When we talk about equity gaps, racism, dyslexia, and other inequalities, it's important for educators to understand development in all domains of learning that also includes social emotional development. Pedagogical skills that are taught in child development and early childhood education, teacher preparation programs like ours at Cal Poly Pomona teach to the whole child and include children and families in building those relationships. This push down of K-12 into this PK3 credential is not what is best for the children in California. And this information is indicated in the Vanderbilt study conducted in Tennessee. From looking at the written comments on SB 488, and this concern tells me that the current K-3 standards are not appropriate because if children in our state are unable to read by the 4th grade, pushing up the tenets of reading, language, and literacy in multilingual contexts that early childhood education programs teach would ensure a more rigorous practice in the teaching of reading and emergent literacy. It's really important for those of you on this call, especially from the dyslexia forums, that you understand early childhood teacher preparation programs and the foundations.
And if you could wrap up your comments, please.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rachel Hurd, and I am a school board trustee in a California Unified School District. I thank you for clarifying that the literacy TPE and program standards developed by the SB 488 work group will be incorporated into these program standards and TPEs. Could your staff please address how the time gap of them not being ready until October and these being adopted today gets addressed. We're just really concerned that that it follows through and that they really happen. Thank you.
Nancy Hurlbut, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Hi, my name is Nancy Hurlbut. I'm an emeritus professor at Early Childhood Studies at Cal Poly Pomona and a previous Dean of Ed at 2 CSUs. I want to thank the Commission for all their work. As has been said previously, these need more ECE depth and breadth and understanding of equity and inclusion. These would be learned in an upper division baccalaureate program. One of my main concerns is who will use these after the initial transition for early childhood professionals. After what was set forth yesterday, higher ed advisors will likely no longer advise students to go into the pre-credential CDECE baccalaureate program due to the MS subject matter issues and the greater flexibility of an MS credential. I assume these TPAs will be addressed during the credential years. For efficiency, faculty resources, and funding, if I were a dean of ed, I would recommend that our ECE special credential pathway be based on students entering the multiple subjects credential program with 24 units of child development, and therefore create no new curriculum or hire no new faculty. These candidates would be less well prepared, but they would meet these standards that seem to be going forward, and it would cost higher ed nothing. These TPAs will likely not be the main TPAs for this credential. Thank you very much.
The individual from Children Now, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Good afternoon, Jessica Sacco on behalf of Children Now. I apologize that my proper name didn't show up in my Zoom identification. Calling in support of your action today, or encouraging you to take action today to adopt the TPEs as amended and presented today, as well as the program standards. And particularly thank you for the inclusion of program standard 4. While Children Now recognizes that there can be some wordsmithing that might need to take place, that the literacy standards that are coming out of the work from SB 488 have yet to be included, we recognize that transition times are really challenging. However, also at the same time, we urge action today in order to continue the work moving forward. And we will continue to partner with the Commission to ensure that these program standards and these TPEs produce the most well-qualified and prepared PK to 3 educators. Thank you.
There are no additional public comments.
Thank you to everyone for your public comment. The public comment period for this item is now closed. Do commissioners have any questions or mic there? Before we go to questions and comments, there were a few questions that came up in the public comment that it might be helpful for staff to address first before we discuss. So the 3 questions were, one was about the literacy TPEs that SB 488 and the work group, there were some questions about when will that be implemented. And then a question about the 24 units not being the only units, but that there are other units also that would be required. So if staff can maybe clarify those questions that came up in public comment, that might be helpful.
So the question is, when will the literacy TPEs be brought forward?
I think, can I jump in? I think I was taking some notes here on some of these questions. Lori DePole raised a particular question about the SB 488 work that is upcoming. We've got a work group meeting next week. And as your timeline from the item yesterday showed, we also have a meeting in July and another in August, and then we'll have an agenda item for you. And the question I heard from Lori DePole was, when will the PK3 version of this be taken up, or will PK3 be adopting the same standard as the multiple subject credential? That's the question that I heard, and I believe the answer, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, anybody in the room, is that next week they will be taking up the multiple subject and special education draft standard and TPEs, and that will be the basis for a discussion on the 12th, the second meeting of the group, where they're going to dig into make sure they've got everything necessary for both K3 and pre-K addressed there.
That is correct.
Okay.
So the literacy TPEs will be, that work will seriously begin in next week. And then the question at hand is, what are the literacy expectations for our array of credentials? So the potential PK3, what would be expected? Gen Ed, multiple subject, and the single subject ELA, what would be expected? The MMSN, ESN, DHHVI, and early childhood credentials under our education specialist group of credentials, what would be expected? So yes, we will begin that work next week, and then that work group meets again July 12th and continues that work, and we will bring that work forward as we go. As we explained with these TPEs in this item, those TPEs, when they get drafted, developed, reviewed, at least on the internal work group, they need to then go out for survey research. We need to take those findings and take that feedback and incorporate that. So there are several iterations coming here forward for us, but yes, they would be developed as appropriate for each type of credential and each type of child or student that would be served by those credentials.
So a second question that I heard, I'll just jump in here if that's okay, was from Tony Ayala regarding 24 units of of early childhood subject matter being insufficient for a PK3 credential. And the endorsements undertaken by the Commission yesterday indicated that for the subject matter knowledge component of this credential, 24 units of early childhood child development coursework would be the minimum necessary. But the teacher preparation portion of earning this credential would also carry early childhood education focus on pedagogy and curriculum standards and how you work effectively with pre-K through 3 students. So taken together, the subject matter knowledge piece and the teacher preparation piece will exceed 24 units and will have to meet the teaching performance expectations that the Commission adopts ultimately. So it is not a limit of 24 units of early childhood child development coursework that the Commission endorsed yesterday. It was a full complement of subject matter and teacher preparation coursework with clinical practice as well.
Thank you for those clarifications. Yes, Commissioner Greno-Shire.
Another piece of feedback we heard from the public had to do with the dyslexia guidelines, and I'm trying to put that together with what Nancy Brynildson talked about with the work that they're doing with the 488 work group. So could you talk a little bit more about how information related to dyslexia is included? Thanks.
Yes, so the dyslexia guidelines will be included everywhere that we can include them, and specifically referenced in the TPEs as source documents, so even in these TPEs and these program standards, as well as the ones coming forward. Even in the assessment guides that we were able to share with you on the mild to moderate and ESN, you can see in the introduction a reference to dyslexia. So even years ago, we were referencing that important work, and we will continue to do that as we continue to work through these TPEs with you and then bring forward the literacy TPEs. And we will be referencing the dyslexia guidelines as a resource and an expectation as we go forward.
Could I just add to that? I'm sorry, you go ahead. Just let me add to Amy's response, if you will. SB 488 explicitly requires that teacher preparation standards include and incorporate the dyslexia guidelines. So we expect whatever comes from our Senate Bill 488 work group to include that language. And what I heard from the Commission yesterday through a motion and action was that what happens with the SB 488 work group for multiple subject special education and single subject ELA will also be required for this pre-K3 early childhood specialist credential. So the dyslexia guidelines will be incorporated there as well.
following commission direction and the direction of SB 488.
That's what I heard yesterday, but I just want to make sure the public heard that again today.
Thank you, Chair Sloan.
So before we have further discussion, I wanted to make a suggestion that we might be able to, as we did yesterday, endorse the TPEs and program standards in concept. We saw a lot of public comments, and we have a lot of good letters that might help us shape things a little bit further. But if we can endorse them today, in the next meeting, staff can bring back some revisions. My understanding could be at the same time, you could also bring back the reg packet. So we could have another look at any, changes. And I would say, for instance, I was the Teach Plus letter, for instance, I was really impressed with some of the suggestions there, for instance.
Was that a motion?
Do we need to talk about these further?
Can I just?
All right. I will move that we will endorse the TPEs and program standards in concept and ask staff to come back at the August meeting with some revisions based on comments and discussion that we heard today.
Okay, I have a motion and I have a second by Commissioner De La Torre. Now I think there may be room for further discussion or comments. Yeah, Commissioner Simmons.
I think that standard 4 is very important.
Yeah, me too.
But my question is whether it's in the right place. I almost feel like it should be a common standard for all of our programs. So I'm very happy to move it forward here now, but I think moving forward, we really want to relook at those common standards to incorporate some of this language.
I agree.
Commissioner Heredia?
Kind of building on that, I just want to offer this suggestion real quick. I just want to make sure that we really note, and maybe it is, and I've overlooked it, just that. Let me go back to my notes here that I took. The EL roadmap, the policy on there that values home language. And then the also just that whole respect of home language and what and students who bring another language. So make sure that that's highlighted in there. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Yeah, Commissioner Brown.
I think there was a third question. There's two things I want to say, so I want to go. There was a third question brought up by Professor or Dean Nancy Hurlbut about what the institutions of higher education were going to do, that they would somehow take the side road or the low road. I wasn't quite sure what road she was describing, except that she was really advocating for a credential that needs more depth and breadth than simply having a multiple subject credential with 24 units. And I just wanted to say, I agree with that. And also, it's been clear from the governor and the legislature and what we have in front of us that if you already hold a multiple subject credential, you will now be required by law to have some early childhood as well if you're going to be teaching TK or eventually UPK. So I'm just trying to say that to the public, but also to Nancy, that those 24 units was my understanding that was a way for the legislature to try to bridge and really require more of a multiple subject credential teacher if they were going to be teaching in early childhood education. But that doesn't mean that we don't need an early childhood education pre to 3 credential. We actually need both. And I think a lot of educators that already have a bachelor's degree and a child development permit are really looking for a way to get involved and be part of public education. And I know, as a person who teaches people at the community college level, there's a lot of interest in the possibility of people moving into this. So I don't think it's an either or, and I didn't think that the idea of requiring 24 units for early childhood was there in a multiple subject credential was there so that the institutions of higher education, particularly the CSUs, wouldn't need to, quote, do anything else. I don't think that was the intention, was it?
No, not at all.
I mean, it sounds a little rough, but I'm
Not-
just now,
not-
I'm
not
getting
at
a
all.
little nervous. That's like, that wasn't the intention.
Well, no, it's not the intention, but I can understand it's the concern, that we are going to find a lowest common denominator and settle there. And I think very much the vision of the master plan, the vision of UTK, the vision of this credential is to put priority on work with our early childhood space, in our early childhood space for TK through grade 3, without having to take on all of the rest of the multiple subject scope, which is considerable and broad. To focus on pre-K through 3 gives us the opportunity to really dig in on early literacy development at the time when it is so critical in the developmental stages of growth, to dig in on early mathematics so that our children get out of 3rd grade with enough foundation that they're really going to benefit and have an opportunity to go through STEM all the way, into engineering if that's what they want to do. And the early childhood space gives us the opportunity to really dig in on these foundations. So all the discussion, absolutely. Developmentally appropriate. Oh, yes, that's right. I think it's challenging when with all of the discussion of nuts and bolts and pieces and parts and how much of this and how much of that, and at the end of the day, do you have a pound or 3/4 of a pound of what? That's not the vision. Those are the engineering parts to build the thing, and that's what this meeting has been intensively about. Which is what do you commissioners, the state standards board for the education profession, what do you think the pieces and parts should be? And your engineers are going to go back and put that together. But the vision was established in the master plan, and I think what we're trying to do is hold to that vision. It does share real estate with the multiple subject credential, and that is what an incredible opportunity to bring these communities of teachers together, those with a deeper focus on the early childhood and those with the broader focus of early childhood through the upper grades, to bring them together and to really begin to think together about the whole population of students that these credential holders will serve. That's the opportunity. So there still continues to be a great deal of concern about what will be won and what will be lost here. And my hope is that we can keep our eye on the vision and keep building toward the vision that's on the drawing board. That's where your staff is, and that's what, with your forbearance, this has been a lot of in the weeds work so far in this meeting. But in the weeds is where we set the foundations that will determine whether we hit the mark or not. So anyway, thank you for letting me weigh in on your comment.
Well, and then the second piece was really that's really what we're about here, is really, not only bringing the younger citizens into the public school setting in a quality way, but also what we're trying to do to support a lot of families in our state that want their children to have a good start and can't afford it. And we're really, so there's an equity issue here as well. And also, we've talked about this as well, trying to create something that not only is better for children and for their families, but also brings in what you call the depth of what it means, what early childhood education means, and how that can lift up. It can broaden the base and lift up the educational system of the state across the way. People have been talking I know it's a long time, but a long time about what children need and their teachers need and what matters. And I'd like to think that early childhood, as broadening that base, can help lift that up.
Commissioner Grinnell-Shire?
I'm not crying, but I can't let this moment go without referencing the comment about what deans will do or will not do. And as a former dean and knowing my colleagues across the segments, what the deans are going to do are work with their education faculty and their child development faculty to build these new programs. We need funding to do that. So I'm going to use this moment once again to emphasize to the field that we need new monies to build these structures because of new staffing, new faculty. But I can assure you that my deans will do that. I can assure you that deans will do this work with the values and that they've always applied. So I just want to make sure that the field heard that.
Yes, Commissioner Heredia.
Just real quick, we talked about the infrastructure that's needed in order to make programs successful. And so I just want to build on, what you just said. It's that we need to look at the allocation of faculty, new monies, new positions for this endeavor. Because if we don't have that, then what's going to happen is that you don't have, in the colleges of education, you don't have, in some areas, a large cohort of people with a specialization in this area. So consequently, right? Yeah. So consequently, that, they could say, this is not my area of expertise. And so what we don't want is we don't want college, institutions of higher learning saying, we just can't even address the need to prepare these students. So that's one of my biggest concerns. So I think that, this is, and I use this term often, it's almost like in school districts where we get unfunded mandates. And it's almost like this is becoming, a mandate here, but it's not funded to the degree in which we can be successful. And so, what happens in school districts? When you get an unfunded mandate, you try to fund the new mandate, and then you have to begin to cut other programs that are successful, but you have to cut them in order to address the new mandate. I don't want to see that happen. I really want all those powers that be to look at what's needed to help make this successful.
Do other commissioners have questions or comments? We do have a motion right now to endorse the proposed teaching performance expectations and standards and to for staff to bring those back to us as regulation package with some of the changes discussed. If there is no further discussion or questions, we'll take a vote. So all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, the motion carries. So thank you, Dr. Jacobson and Ms. Rising. And with that, I think this time around, having no additional items today, I recess the Educator Preparation Committee until tomorrow.
All right, thank you very much. I will now recess the general session. Members of the commission will go into closed session. The general session will reconvene at 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you, everyone.